drinking 5-6 times a week and MDMA and cocaine pretty much every time I was drinking. Basically couldn't name a time where I didn't have a blunt in my hand. Here you are, fully in the present moment. Your battery level, your charge level is 100%. The moment you start worrying about what's going on tomorrow or what you have to do in the future, you're like draining yourself of this energy. You're going to attract more of those things that it sounds like you probably don't want. If you're worrying about them or fearful of what happened in the past, you're going to attract more of those in the future. Whereas if you're in the present moment, you're going to have a lot more intentionality and focus on the things that you do want. They always tell me, you won't believe what happened. And I'm like, I believe it. You've changed. You are different than where you were before. A couple minutes in the sauna after the gym, a guided 2-minute meditation in the sauna. I'm like, fuck yeah.
Pat Smith is joining me today on Tiny Table Talks with Tay. Pat, you are a repeat guest on the show. I first had you on when after you invited me to the Dr. Joe Dispenza Advanced Meditation Retreat down in San Diego. That was a wonderful time. That was actually one of the big shifts in my life after I got to experience that, which we're definitely going to get into today. And before we do that, we're going to take shots. We're going to get a little drunk here on ketones, which are not actual alcohol. Ketones are like rocket fuel for your brain and body. Increased mental clarity, enhanced physical performance, and sustained energy. This is my second shot today. Cheers.
Also second shot.
Nice. Shout out to Ketone IQ for being a sponsor of this podcast and also a sponsor of the Immersion. Everybody who attended got 2 bottles of Ketone IQ as well as 1 travel shot that they can take back with them on the plane. So use code CaptainMorgan_20 to get the hookup on HVMN's Ketone IQ. All right, Pat Smith. Hello.
Good morning, lad.
I love seeing your face and your energy. You just embody the work that you do. So to begin it, tell everybody about the work that you do, and then we'll get into a little bit of your backstory and what brought you here.
Sure. So currently, I'm a men's health optimization coach, and the other part of my business is consultant for a group called NeuroChange Solutions. It's an organization run by Dr. Joe Dispenza, and we take in meditation, emotional intelligence, and stress regulation into the workplace to really create cultures that are more productive, efficient, collaborative, knowing that right now in the current business landscape that you have to think alternatively to get new results and better results with such a drastically changing world around us. And the companies that are diving in to ultimately invest in their employees and develop them are the ones that are going to be there for decades to come, and the ones that aren't are going to fall by the wayside. So my mission, based off my past corporate experience, is to be able to go into these companies, to evolve them, to grow them, to open their mind to new ways of thinking instead of being stuck in their old ways.
I like the example you gave in the sauna yesterday about how companies say that they want to increase their revenue, and what are they doing to do that? The same old thing over and over again. You want to talk a little bit about that and why that doesn't work?
Sure. Yeah, it's I think there's an Albert Einstein quote that says you can't fix the same problems with the same mind that created them. And so if you think of business in a sense, we see, especially in the American society, that everybody wants more money, more sales, more growth, but they're not willing to do anything differently. So the majority of leaders are so stuck in their ways that the uncertainty of doing something differently scares them so much that they just keep doing the same things, but then getting upset that they haven't reached the true success that they want to reach in their business. And so by investing in their employees, teaching them these emotional type skills, teaching them meditation, teaching them breathing techniques, it actually puts them into a better state of mind so they can start to receive new information. They can start to act on new things that are going to then transcend a business from where they are now to where they really want to go 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Yeah. The definition of insanity.
Exactly.
Doing the same thing over and over
Exactly.
again, expecting different results.
Mm-hmm.
And we do the same thing in our lives, right?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
outside of a business sense, we all do this. Like
Mm-hmm.
we say we want this thing, but we keep repeating the same patterns and habits over and over.
Right.
And you know a little bit about habit change.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
before we get into the ins and outs of habit change and how to change your energy to ultimately change your life and create the life that you want to live,
Mm-hmm.
talk to us a little bit about your background and your origin story. Like, you weren't always this
No.
optimized,
No.
jacked, and
Yeah, I've
and
got
super
a.
tan man.
I've
you
got
had before us.
right here, the Project Pat. So that's the nickname that all my friends back in my hometown used to call me early on. Really focused in on partying all the time, right? Drugs, alcohol. Used to sell all types of drugs, and I don't even know if I've said that on a podcast before, but I just told everybody, so don't incriminate me. But and yeah, that was my story from 14 to 24. I was really in the depths of drug and alcohol addiction, even though from the outside looking in, things looked normal. I played baseball all the way up until I got to college. I went to a state school, had a really good GPA, graduated in 4 years somehow while, drinking 5, 6 times a week and MDMA and cocaine pretty much every time I was drinking, and basically couldn't name a time where I didn't have a blunt in my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were some specific circumstances that happened when one of my family members passed away where I really hit rock bottom. And I had to go into the depths of myself to figure out, what is it do I actually want in life, and when am I actually going to take ownership and responsibility for my life? And when I did that, I got really into understanding how stress can mentally strain our body and emotionally strain our body. And I realized that for so long I never paid attention to my mental and emotional health because I was always numbing what I had with drugs and alcohol. And so that got me really into understanding meditation and diving deeper and working on myself. And then over the course of time, just figuring out, okay, if I felt that bad at rock bottom, what's the opposite of that? And the opposite is how healthy, how fulfilled, how focused can I be? And that's what really got me on the journey to where I am today and where I still plan to go.
I remember that's what brought you to me, because you started as a client of mine.
Yeah.
Just how can I optimize my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we talked about that has been brought up here many times is you were at the time working a job that you weren't fulfilled with, that you knew you weren't going to spend the rest of your life in, and that was a big sticking point for you.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So talk to us about how you were able to recently come to the decision that you were done with that,
Mm-hmm.
and now on to what you do now.
Yeah, it's actually a funny story because, like Taylor and I said, we started working together, I think it was in January of last year, and we really talked about, about optimizing your life. And my nutrition, my movement, my meditations, they were good. I was making good money, too, at my old job, right? Multiple six figures, and, there was still that nagging voice in the back of my head, like, this isn't what you're supposed to be doing the rest of your life. And fast forward a few months later, Taylor and I met in person for the second time and went to the Joe Dispenza retreat.
Well, we first met in Virginia.
Yeah, I was saying that was our second time in person. And I trusted him enough that I let him stay in my hotel room for the entire week. So, and that's a whole different story. But it was a great week, by the way. But it just opened my eyes to everything that was available, and that actually brought me into seeing the organization NeuroChange Solutions, because they kind of were promoting it there at the week-long retreat, and it started to get me thinking about, wow, I see these same needs in the company that I was in, and I was like, maybe I need to be that person to really help them because I really understand what this work is about. So fast forward a few months later, and I had, at the time, this was in October, late September, October of last year, and I had an inclination that no matter what, by the end of the year, by the end of last year, I was going to quit my job no matter what. And so I had been saving up money, and then I was actually at another week-long retreat Dr. Joe Dispenza retreat at the end of September and October. And as Taylor knows, the walking meditations that we do are very powerful because you start walking and acting as if you're already living a life before it actually happens. And that feeling it's kind of indescribable.
Very powerful.
And so the first day, I I didn't necessarily take vacation that week from my job, but I was also working remote, and I always handled my stuff. Nothing ever got done. I never kind of slipped past. I never got everything done. Had a great sales territory, highest in the company, pretty close. And I just remember that morning we were doing walking meditation, and I was sitting there and I was in pure bliss, sun shining down on me, and I kind of just got this voice that whispered to me. And looking back, I think it was a voice of whether it was myself or my cousin who passed away, and it said, "Why are you always wasting your time on other people's dreams, but you won't waste it on yours?" Not waste it, but won't take time for your own dreams. What makes you think that if you can't be successful at chasing someone else's dreams, that you can't be successful at chasing yours? And I was like, damn, like, okay.
Boom.
And then I didn't have my phone. I had my phone on airplane mode. We went to breakfast. Next thing you know, I opened my phone on up, and I put it off airplane mode, and I had been blown up by everyone in my company, which to me was surprising because I get stuff handled. They never really have to worry about me. And there was just some circumstances that it was an opportunity, and we talked about this yesterday, that I do have something for me to work through is when I have to go talk to someone about something tough, I really feel it there in the throat chakra, but it was like the situation that happened and some of the questions like, hey, do you even enjoy this job that was asked to me by my boss and my owner, was like opening the doors wide open for me to be like, yo, now's your time. You don't even have to step into the uncomfort because it's already sitting there waiting. And I pretty much told them, hey, let's just cut to the chase. By the end of the year, I was going to quit my job anyways. I'm just going to put my 2 weeks in now. And like this weight like fell off. And, they asked if, what would it take for me to stay there, money, whatever. And I told him that's not what it's about anymore. I was making multiple six figures. It's not about the money. It's about me feeling fulfilled. And I just had turned 30 a couple months ago. And so I was thinking to myself, if I don't do it now, I'm more than likely going to trick myself into thinking that I'm never going to be able to do it, especially down the line if I look into marriage and kids. And so that's what led me to really just taking that leap. And I will say that my life has changed dramatically for the better since then.
Yeah. It's a noticeable difference.
Yeah.
Do you suffer with stress, anxiety, trouble sleeping? If so, you could be part of the 80% of people who don't get enough magnesium in their diet. Most supplement brands use cheap, low-quality ingredients at ineffective doses. Bioptimizers goes all in on the formulations, combining 7 different forms of bioavailable magnesium. That's why I recommend Magnesium Breakthrough from Bioptimizers.
All right, so before we continue on, I want to take it back to back to when you were Project Pat.
Yeah.
Back to before the Pat that's sitting before me now.
Yeah.
You said you weren't focusing on your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
What were you focusing on at that point?
Everything I could do to distract myself from those emotions unknowingly. I didn't even know that it was a thing. And so all I was worried about was, it's like they say in the rap songs, it's like, fuck bitches, get money. I was like kind of really what was serious. I mean, like, smoking weed, drinking, partying, like doing anything that you can think of to literally distract myself from ever facing some of the things that we worked through yesterday, right? Pain and not pain and suffering, but pain and stories and situations as a child with parents splitting up and other things that, unconsciously I didn't even realize were affecting me. And so that's all I spent my time doing. I didn't, but then at the same token, I was also making sure that I put on a nice facade for my parents of getting good grades and playing sports.
Yep.
Now, it didn't mean that I didn't come reeking of weed every night into the house, but hey, I got to practice and I got good grades and I could get into school, and I kind of try to cover it up to that sense, but looking back, I realized how detrimental the things I was doing was pushing me. So the gap between me understanding my emotions every time was pushing me further and further away. Year after year, blunt after blunt, whatever, trip after trip, drink after drink. It just took me so much further away. So when I had to come back to further on in my early 20s, like I was in a really down bad spot mentally.
Yeah. Those of you guys who know my story, I can relate to this. When I was in the Marine Corps, like I was in the best shape of my life. Like I was fit as fuck. And on the outside, I was living a great life, right? Like I was a Marine. I looked good. I had a great family. But inside, I was not depressed, but I would frequently say that I hate my life. And as we know, the power of words, that is what I was affirming. This fucking sucks. I hate my life. I would dread getting back on the plane after taking leave from the Marine Corps and having to go back to base. It was just this feeling of like emptiness and apathy. Like I didn't care if the plane crashed. Like I knew that what I was going back to fucking sucked. So it's like, what's the point, right? And you know this, the diagram that Dr. Joe puts in Becoming Supernatural of the person with, the energy radiating off them, and it's, all of these external factors, texts, emails, work, relationships, car troubles, groceries, the news, social media. So it sounds like you and I were both placing all of our energy and attention on these external factors. And because of that, we had no energy for ourselves, which is why we were in that state. Correct? You want to talk a little bit about how where you place your attention is where you place your energy?
Yeah, I looked at a diagram very similarly where it's like you here in the middle. This is how I at least imagine it or picture it in my head is, here you are fully in the present moment, and your battery level, your charge level is 100%. The moment you start worrying about what's going on tomorrow or what you have to do in the future, and you start thinking about what that person did to you a few days ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you're like draining yourself of this energy. And so now you don't really have any true energy to focus on the things that you do want because your battery level is so drained down. So you're going to attract more of those things that it sounds like you probably don't want. If you're worrying about them or fearful of what happened in the past, you're going to attract more of those in the future. Whereas if you're in the present moment, you're going to have a lot more intentionality and focus on the things that you do want because you're not worried about what's going on later or what happened yesterday. You're fully focused, and that is a vibrational frequency. And I mean, it's definitely something that it can't be seen. We were talking about it in the sauna, right? There's like a sixth sense out there. It's just this frequency, and that you can't see it, but you can feel it. And when you surrender into the present moment, those things match what you had to what you have to offer. And I think Nate's breath work last night was a great example of it. Him and I discussed, do you want to do a meditation afterwards and then breath work first? And then I went up to him and mentioned to him that, hey, why don't you just go ahead and do the breath work? And the meditation that I had written down, which I'm going to read.
One of my favorite ways to protect myself from EMFs is swimming in the ocean. And even when I can't, I'm still protected with my Aries Tech LifeTune Flex. It protects me from the oxidative stress caused by electromagnetic radiation that can cause things like headaches, fatigue, and trouble sleeping. To get yours, head to ariestech.com and use code Captain Morgan. That's ariestech.com, use code Captain Morgan. All right, back to the show.
So breathing in through the root, basically, like he was saying, breathing in through the through your root chakra, up into your upper torso, through the heart, through the chest, out through the rest, through the top of the head, and let it go into the universe. Putting your hand on your heart, opening your heart, like it's like he had read this book before it actually happened, but it's these synchronicities, these things that are weird, which aren't necessarily weird. It's just, when you're sitting there surrendering into the present moment, that stuff plays out all the time. And I notice it with my clients. I notice it with myself in my own situations. I mean, there's endless counts of where that's happened to me and where that's happened to clients. And they always tell me, you won't believe what happened. And I'm like, I believe it. You've changed. You are different than where you were before. You're not focused and worried about what's going on. You're just settled into your body, comfortable and trusting that the universe has so much in store for you. And that energy, just that belief is telling the energy, okay, they accept and are believing that we're there. Now we need to kind of gift them to that. And there's things that pop up in many different ways.
Yeah, there really are no coincidences
Mm-hmm.
in my experience. What I used to think were coincidences, now I just see as, of course.
Yeah.
Of course that happened, because that is what I was drawing in.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, who's videoing right now, shout out to Joe Buchanan Lindley right there. The before the immersion, some logistical things fell through with the videographer who was supposed to attend. I reached out to Joe like a few days before the immersion and was like, hey, and I had just met him at the time. We had just recorded a podcast together. I knew he did videography and editing. I was like, hey, would you be available to fly out in a few days to come film the immersion? And he had just been let go of his job, and it was like just this perfect serendipitous energy, like, of course this happened right now.
Yeah.
And here he is fucking loving the experience as he's nodding his head. So yeah, it's, of course these happen for a reason. Like, people think that it's random or coincidence. It's not. Like,
Yeah.
it's meant to be. And there's so many of those little moments that have been happening here.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm going to just share a quick story. So very similarly, me working with companies, when I started getting into it, you know, I noticed myself getting somewhat anxious or worried about when am I going to be able to start working with companies and sharing this information. And I started meditating on it and just relaxing, knowing that it's well on its way. And I'll be honest, I did it for a couple of days through meditation. Then one morning I opened my email and or my computer and my email. And the email address is specific to my Neural Change Solutions email account, which not many people at all have the email address. And I get this email from this gentleman and don't know who he is. And he messaged me and said, hey, I found your email address on the NCS website. I'm local to Charlotte and I'm interested in bringing the work that you do into my company. I'm like, oh my God, like I was just thinking on this. And even further, he says, hey, I'm located in Dilworth, which is a neighborhood in Charlotte. Of all the neighborhoods of a town of 200, you know, 1 million to 2 million people in the greater Charlotte area. And it's the same neighborhood I live in, right? Few blocks down the road. Hey, maybe we could get on a call. And I'm like, no, maybe tomorrow we meet for a coffee. And he's like, okay. And we start hitting off. Perfect, right? This isn't it. So I'm like, okay, well, that just fell in my lap. The guy's right down the street. He's got his own business. It's a functional medicine business, which is like right up my alley. We really got to connect it off. So I start training his group in himself. And I was chatting with him a little bit, and they're moving from a specific business model to a new business model. And I start talking to him about, you know, what he wants for his company. And he really wanted individuals to step out and start taking charge on their own within the business with him being a little more hands off. And there's a 55 and older community that's being built by me. It's a luxury condo building, and he is all focused on health and wellness and longevity. He's like, it would be a great thing to be partners with those types of buildings because we already know those are our prime demographics. And I said, yeah, that'd be wonderful. Well, we're there with about 6 or 7 of his team members. We go through the training. It goes great. Then I go into their shop a couple of days or about a week later, and I go in and I'm talking with the owner. And then afterwards, I have one of the gals grab me, and she said, hey, do you mind chatting with me behind the building? And I'm thinking, okay, sure. Like maybe she had some questions about the training. And she said she really enjoyed the training so much that she was asking if I do anything personally, one-on-one. And the majority of the people that I work with are men, but I, of course, wanted to hear her out, wanted to see what she was getting used to. Fast forward, we start working together 2-3 weeks later, and I asked her how things are going at work. And she's the wellness coordinator, and she said, oh, well, I'm having a meeting later. I said, oh, yeah, who are you having a meeting with? She said, well, the wellness director or the director of this 55 and older building is called in asking to speak to me to find out if we could become partners for their new condo building that's going up, which is like right next to my building. And I said, is the name of it The Village? And she said, well, yeah. And I'm like, you know that your owner and I were talking about that in the presence of you, and you weren't even aware of the conversation. And they called you out of nowhere to find out if you could be their preferred company to work with in a wellness. And she's like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, does he even know about the owner? Didn't even know about it. She didn't know about it. And it was just like the weirdest thing. It was like these things were just starting to fall in her lap. And I noticed her energy because she wasn't so worried about when things were going to happen. She just knew they were going to happen. And it was almost like I heard a guy in the sauna the other day saying that, you know, when you're worried or you're anxious, you're literally blocking your blessings from coming in because you can't see those possibilities that are right out in front of you. And it was the same thing for her. And when she started to drop into that energy to trust herself, that stuff just fell right in her lap. And I couldn't believe it to be true, but then I'm thinking this happens way too often, and I 100% believe it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right. You can't create from a place of
Lack.
stress.
Yeah.
And lack.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, change your energy, change your life.
Mm-hmm.
Quite literally. So I want to bring it back a little bit. So you and I were both physically shredded and in good shape, but mentally we weren't. You're wearing a sweatshirt that says mentally shredded.
Yeah, shout out to my boy Chris in Charlotte. This is his mental health awareness company. So
Nice. So how can we've already covered a lot of it, but a lot of guys are focused on getting physically shredded, right? And not that that's bad, right? Nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Being physically fit is great. Like, that's fantastic. And I think, take out the thing, too much of the focus, energy, and attention goes into looking a certain way, but without feeling a certain way. Because a lot of people want to start going to the gym to feel the way that they imagine that the person with the six-pack feels, right? But as you and I have both personally experienced, we were physically shredded, but mentally we were like, fuck this.
right.
So we've already covered a lot of it, but how are some other ways that we can become mentally shredded?
I mean, one of the things happened yesterday, right? Can you be as vulnerable as you can and break down that barrier? Because that, first and foremost, is going to get you focused on your emotions that maybe you were blocking for so long. And, you know, using, as Chase was talking about, using the gym as therapy.
Yep.
That's not the case. You have to go inward. So it can be as much as, you know, what we experienced yesterday with writing out your stories, meditating, sitting with yourself, understanding your emotions. I mean, there's so many tools, but I like to utilize those. And to your point is, you know, you can put someone with very little confidence in a red sports car, and they can be confident for a little bit, but the moment they get out of that sports car, they're not there. So it's almost to the way I think about it is like, you have to feel what that feels like ahead of the actual event, especially with whatever it is, emotion you're trying to reach. In the gym, you want to be confident. That's what, you know, a lot of people think, oh, once you're shredded, you're this super confident guy. But if you go in there and you're just covering it up and covering up, you're actually distancing yourself from understanding your emotions. So when I think, and what worked for me, my personal story is, one, it really just started with a gratitude journal, right? I was writing out, okay, what are the things I'm grateful for in the morning? Just 3 things. I thought I was like killing it. And that's a great start. And same thing when I was meditating. Couple minutes in the sauna after the gym, a guided 2-minute meditation in the sauna. I'm like, fuck yeah, like I was killing it.
Something is always better
Right.
than nothing.
It's like one step at a time, right?
Yes.
It was up climbing this mountain that we talk about, but it's one step at a time. It's no big jump or leap. And that's what it starts to build up. So the consistency and the intentionality of doing it and believing that it's going to work for you are, I think, like the 2 or 3 things that are can get individuals to reach their peak mental fitness. Yeah, that's what I would say.
To reach their meat.
Yeah, reach their meat.
That hasn't been a problem for me. I've always been able to see it, to reach it, to do whatever I please with it.
He wasn't saying that after the ice bath earlier. So.
Yeah, little shriveled. Yeah, the journey to the top of the mountain begins with one step. But oftentimes we look up at the top of the mountain, we see, fuck, that's going to be a bitch.
Yeah.
And we fail to see the one step that we have to take, which is very simple.
Yeah.
Right? You look up, you're like, fuck, I can't do that. what can you do?
Yeah.
You can take one step.
Yeah.
Right.
What you put into your body today is the foundation for who you become tomorrow. That's why I fuel with Ketone IQ from HVMN. They're redefining the limits of human performance, metabolism, and longevity. I use Ketone IQ before every podcast to keep my mind sharp and clear. Head over to hvmn.com and use code CaptainMorgan_20 to get yours today. Back to the show.
How was that story work session yesterday with Chase and Dave?
You tell me how you thought it went for me.
Phenomenally. What unlocked there for you, or what has changed from yesterday to today?
I mean, yesterday was a great day, right? You know, I think I had told y'all, y'all saw me in tears, which I don't necessarily cry often. I hadn't cried, and I couldn't tell you in a while, but it just reminded me that the stories and the specific circumstances that I've been through, whether they seem trivial to some people based off what other people are going through, they're my own, and I don't have to live by those. And you know, Nate took me through, you know, we had the breath work last night, and
which was fucking phenomenal, by the way. Nate's not here, but that was amazing.
Yeah, Nate, wherever you're at.
Nate,
phenomenal.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it just definitely reminded me that when you can surrender into your body and surrender that things are going to work out exactly for you, I mean, things start to come up, right? I start to realize that, as I mentioned, the stories that were once with me, especially about love and about opening the heart and letting love in, were all things based off me being stuck on something that happened to me in the past. And we talked about it. If you're stuck on the ways and thinking of the past, you can't step into a new future because you're stuck in the past. And if you're thinking or feeling in the past, you're not in the present moment. And yeah, that really helped me. And it also reminded me that the more I trust myself, the more I'm vulnerable, the more I open up, and the more I have my own back and be my own cheerleader, like there's no limit to any of the possibilities that are out there for me and whatever it is I want in my life.
Yeah, the only limits are the ones that we consciously or subconsciously place on ourselves. And that's the power of the words and the story work.
Sure.
We've been telling ourselves this story that has not been useful to us.
Right.
It's kept us in this position of stuckness or hurt or haunted. And until we address that story, we're just going to keep reliving the same patterns, expecting different results.
Yeah, right? And to that point, one of the things that I noticed, especially when I was coming out of being or kind of really addicted to drugs and alcohol, was I didn't realize that those thoughts that I was having, every time you have a thought, you produce this chemical. And if you have a negative thought, you produce a negative chemical. And it wasn't that I was just addicted to the chemicals of drugs and alcohol. I was addicted to the chemicals of my thoughts. And it was such a hardwired loop that it was that automatic program that I didn't even realize it was going on. And so it just reminded me that if you can have a negative thought, you're going to produce negative chemicals. But if you can start to think the good thoughts, you're going to start to develop the good chemicals. And that can start to rewrite the program of how you want to feel on a day-to-day basis. Because if people don't, then they're constantly living by that negative chemical, and that chemical is sending a stress response. Just like if you break your leg, it's the same stress response as if you break your leg, as if you feel that emotional stress in your body. And in that, you're moving into these higher brain waves, and you can't even fathom, and Brooks was talking about, right, you have a veil. You can't even fathom that there's another possibility other than the one that you're seeing, because you're so in this heightened state, unbeknownst to you, but you're in this heightened state that you can't even accept any new information in. And when you drop that barrier to become vulnerable, and of course through the breath work, it really allows you to get out of the sympathetic into the parasympathetic. I mean, that veil gets removed. The doors that you see of all the opportunities come wide open, and they present themselves to you in a way that is I guess priceless, indescribable, sometimes feels too real to be true almost.
Yeah, a lot of people are addicted to living in a familiar hell.
Yeah.
And scared of going into an unfamiliar heaven. Right? So we're just stuck in these habits and patterns and negative feedback loops that keep us in the familiar hell, but it's okay because it's what we know.
Yeah.
And doing anything different is the unknown.
Yeah.
Right? So I imagine we've talked a lot about it
Sure.
today already, but what are some action items that you recommend people take if they are stuck in these negative feedback loops?
Sure. Well, one, I would say write out where you're trying to go. And I look at it as this, this is based off some of the work with Dr. Joe Dispenza, but we call it the river of change. So you can go from the old self to the new self, but to get from the old self to the new self, you got to get through the river of change. And the river of change has some very fucking choppy waters. There's going to be some logs in the river, and there's going to be some blocks, and you might get stuck, and
rapids.
There might not be a current for you to move along with. But first and foremost, find out where you're trying to go. How, write that down, figure it out, get very crystal clear, very specific on where you want to go.
Specific is key.
Yeah, very specific. I mean, you have to give your brain and body instructions on where it wants to go. If you want, someone told me, hey, if you want more money, I can give you $1, but that doesn't do anything for you, right? How much money do you want? How do you want to think, act, and feel? Who do you want to be around? Where do you want to be? Like getting crystal clear on that vision and having that vision as that guiding light, because when you enter in and have that vision, then you can utilize that as your guidance point or guide through life, because then there's going to be specific obstacles that come up from your environment. Certain people that are going to come up, they're going to try to persuade you, say, oh, you shouldn't do this, or this is too hard. Nope, you have to hold the vision higher than where they're at. Your body is going to try to persuade you no matter what to go back to that familiar. Hey, Brooks, that's not familiar. We should go back to what we were doing before because that doesn't feel right. No, you have to keep that vision higher than that. And then, of course, if we're focusing only on the past, if we're only focused on the past, then ultimately you're going to do more of the same instead of thinking about what that future is. So getting very clear, specific idea of where you want to go, utilizing things like journaling, meditation, and noticing the first part, I think, is just noticing and having conscious awareness when those obstacles come up, whether it's from the environment, something around you, whether it's an urge from the body to try to tell you to go back to what's familiar and known. Like that awareness, first and foremost, is going to get you thinking in new ways. And once you start doing that and you start seeing it, you can't not see it. It's just like the red sports car analogy. Once you buy one, and then once you see it, you're going to see more of it. So if you start to see that vision and you start to get up against an obstacle that's against the grain of that vision, and you see that vision instead, victory, victory, victory. Now that new program is going to run on autopilot for you, and that's going to become the new voice inside of your head opposed to that victim mentality or that feeling stuck.
Yep, that's the reticular activating system,
exactly.
Which I've talked about many times on this podcast. You're going to continue to find more of what you're looking for.
Oh, yeah.
So I've given this example many times on the podcast. Like right now, and everybody can do this, look around and count as many black objects as you can find.
Right.
All right, time. How many did you get?
I got at least 5 or 6.
I got 10.
Okay.
Now, how many red objects did you count?
Exactly.
Yeah, nothing. And you can replace the colors with positive and negative situations in your life, right? Like if you're always looking and focused on everything that's going wrong, everything that you need to be stressed out about, you're going to continue to find more of those things, because then the lines start to blur. It's like, well, is that black or is that gray? It looks a little gray, but I'm going to call it black because that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Right? And we just completely block out all of the positive aspects. Not that they're not there, but we're just not looking at them. Right? And that voice in the head when we're taking action towards habit change can be very loud, because your body and your brain is like, hey, this is unfamiliar to us. Why don't you go back to your comfort zone?
Right.
Regardless of whether or not that comfort zone was beneficial for you, you want to return to that state because that's your habit. Right? So that voice can be very loud. And I like to remind my clients when that voice is screaming at them to return to their familiar ways, to remember their why. Because as Viktor Frankl said in Man's Search for Meaning, a man who has a strong enough why can bear almost any how. Right? So when you're in those challenging moments, those dark places where you really don't want to get up and get in the ice bath, or you really don't want to go work out, you remember your why.
Yeah.
Why am I doing this?
Sure.
And that becomes your North Star. I have my clients create their MVVP,
Right.
mission, vision, values, and purpose. And that becomes your treasure map, your North Star. This is where I'm going and why I'm going there.
Yeah.
Right. And also to what you were saying earlier, the brain can't differentiate between what is imagined and like what you're envisioning versus what's actually happening, right? So talk to us about the power of visualization and mental rehearsal.
Yeah, and so you were mentioning it a little bit, right? When you're stressed, you can't see anything equal. You can't take any information in or feel anything equal to other than how you're feeling. So if you're thinking stressed, right, you're in this high beta brainwave pattern, and just like if Taylor was super pissed off and I tell him to calm down.
Like when Jeremiah drank my coffee this morning.
Yeah. If I tell him to calm down in that heightened state, he can't take any new information in other than how he's feeling based off his brainwave. If you look at a high beta brainwave pattern, it's so imagine trying to entering information, and when I think of it as like think of a money counter where it's just try to put more money in, it's not going to work, but you have to let it slow down. And first, meditation allows it to let it slow down, and getting into this from the analytical mind into the subconscious mind. And when you're there, you're in a very highly suggestible hypnotic state, ultimately, to a degree. And the brain is a fascinating thing, but the one thing that it doesn't necessarily have, unless you're conscious of it, is a filter. So the brain doesn't know the difference. It thinks you're living in if you think of something negative in the past, it believes it's living in that past life experience and feels like that same emotion from that past life experience. Because it does.
To pause right there, that's why when we're going through story work, that's why we get these physical sensations in the body as if we're reliving that moment, because in the brain we're in that state.
Yeah. And the brain doesn't know the difference between the emotion that's created from the real life experience and the emotion that you can create through thought alone. So if you can think something enough times, the brain and the body, biologically, neurochemically, the neurocircuitry in your brain, your hormones, your gene expression, literally are going to start to change, and you're going to start to act in more familiar, more common, more normal ways like that specific person before the event actually happens. And that's visualization at its finest. And you think, I've seen some different studies. One of them was a group of basketball players shooting free throws for a month straight. You know, the guys who physically did it for a month straight improved by 24%. The individuals who just mentally rehearsed it were able to then go out on the court and improve 23% from their original time to the other. And, of course, there's a control group. And it just shows the power of visualization and understanding. And I know for myself, without a doubt, that's helped me get to where I am and really just feel what it would feel like around that, so that when you are in the face of fear, it's going to feel so much more normal. You've already experienced it because you've thought it enough times that when you walk in, that discomfort, it might still be there, but not to the degree that it's going to scare you off, because your brain and body have already been given instructions on what to do next.
There's a fantastic example of Michael Phelps doing this in the Olympics. When he dove in the water, his goggles filled with water. And so, most people would, I would fucking like panic or like mess with the goggles and try to fix them. But because he had rehearsed it so many times, he basically did the whole race with his eyes basically closed, and you can't see.
Right.
But because he just rehearsed it so many times, he actually won.
Yeah.
Which is just fascinating, right?
Yeah, I never heard that. That's amazing.
Yeah. And there's also examples of strength adaptations through just the power of the mind.
Yeah, there's a bicep curl, I think, study where it showed individuals who were actually curling versus mentally thinking that they were curling weights, and there was actually growth in their muscles from that alone.
Is that how you got so jacked? Just
yeah.
fucking meditating all day.
It's hey, I'm double. I tell people, I say, take the actions. You got to take the actions in real life, but double dip in the work. Meditation, it's already fast forwarding you to get to that result ahead of time. And that's what I love to do when I'm working with companies is their competition doesn't know that. They don't know this stuff. They're not willing to seek out the time and energy to do it. So it's like, whoa, what if I could tell you what it would feel like to grow your business from 10 million to 100 million, if that's the case of who I'm working with. Shout out to anybody who wants to work together, because I haven't worked with a $10 million client, but you know,
Yet.
the potential's out there. It's already exists. But yeah, can you envision what you need to feel like, how the operation needs to be run, how efficient it needs to be, how collaborative you and your team need to be? And that alone is giving you instructions to already like just think in new ways so that when you step in, you actually can see those possibilities. And I mean, you can double dip in the work in whatever it is you want to change, personally, professionally, spiritually, however.
Yeah.
I think but yeah, that's a mix of how I got so jacked. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
All right, before we get to the last two questions, where can people find more about you and what you do?
For sure. The majority of my stuff is on Instagram, Pat Smith Wellness. I also have a website, Pat Smith Wellness. And if anybody's looking to work together in terms of like a company standpoint, there's a page on my website under courses for Pat Smith Wellness. It's going to explain some of the trainings and workshops that I do with companies. But the majority of my stuff will be on Instagram is the best.
Sweet. All right. What are you currently most excited about? Big breath. Excitement is a fun emotion.
I'm most excited about seeing where I'm at a year from now. A year ago was when I saw Taylor for the first time or second time in person when we were at the Dr. Joe retreat, and I realized looking back the tremendous amount of growth I've had. Patting myself on the back and actually celebrating that, and realizing that if I can do that in a year while still working a corporate job, like a full year of my own focus on my own business with the companies that I plan to work with and some of the retreats and things that I have planned out in the future, it just gets me so excited to know that I actually took the leap of faith and trusted in myself, and even more excited to keep leaning in the next couple of days here at the Immersion to still get deeper and to understand myself better, because the more I do, the better my life gets, and that's fucking exciting.
Yeah. We got 2 full days left.
Yeah.
This is Friday, and we're just getting started.
Mm-hmm.
And we got a whole another day. So
sure.
I'm excited for that as well. And yeah, especially with the competitive advantage that you have of being both physically and mentally shredded. Because not a lot, because as I've said, this is a 2018 stat that 75% of Americans are overweight or obese. And since the pandemic, that number has obviously increased.
Mm-hmm.
So not a lot of people are physically in shape. But it provides such a competitive advantage when you can be both physically and mentally shredded, and understanding words and how your energy affects your physical reality, right? Like I'm excited for you.
Appreciate it.
To see the growth in the next year.
Yeah, we're gonna blast off.
Hell
that's
yeah.
for sure.
I fucking blasted off on these ketones.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like,
nootropics. I'm there.
I must have been talking fast because I felt it.
Yeah. All right. Last question. What does thriving mean to you?
Thriving is just being my greatest self in all areas, as a friend, as a family member, as someone who respects themselves and is willing to focus on all areas of their life, not just their physical looks and attributes, but their mental and emotional health, their financial health. And when you can at least give yourself time into every segment of those areas, like, you're bound to thrive. And there's ebbs and flows. So sometime you'll be more focused on your financial health or physical health, but knowing if you can, very similar to what Chase mentioned, right? We saw the Captain's Code. We all got a copy of it. When you can start to implement all of those areas that are there, at least as frequently as possible, maybe not all of them in every day, but if you can start to just focus on one of those per day, I mean, there's no reason not to thrive. And I want to be that leading example. And when I'm there, when you get calls, like, Taylor gets calls from former Marine guys and whatnot, is when you get calls from people, from your random people you haven't talked to decades, like, you're stepping in that lane, and I'm just really looking forward to leaning into that, and I know that I'm thriving as best as I can now because I am leaning into all those.
Hell yeah. And especially for all the listeners out there, leaning into the areas that you're most scared of exploring.
Mm-hmm.
That is where the growth lies. One of my favorite quotes from Stephen Pressfield is, fear tells us exactly what we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what most people neglect because there's a monster in there.
Mm-hmm. Your greatest growth is on the other side of fear.
There we go. Pat, my purpose is to #make thriving standard. Thank you for coming out to the Immersion and being on the Captain's Lifestyle podcast for round 2 and helping me fulfill my purpose to make thriving standard.
Appreciate all you've done.
Live the Captain's Lifestyle. Peace.